Glen Rock, New Jersey, January 11th, 2011, 3:47 p.m. A black sedan pulls up, stops. A modest two-story house. Population 11,000. The kind of town where nothing ever happens. Inside, second floor. George Hotz, 21 years old, thin, messy hair, gutted electronics everywhere, tangled wires, 3 glowing monitors. Hasn't slept in 3 days. His phone buzzes, a text from his father. There are lawyers at the door. Not just any lawyers. Sony Computer Entertainment of America, one of the largest corporations on Earth. Annual revenue, $78 billion. Legal team, 200 attorneys, 40 countries. They're here for him. The charges: Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, breach of PlayStation Network terms. But Sony isn't asking for an apology. They want IP addresses. Everyone who visited his website, everyone who downloaded his code, everyone who even looked at what he built. George reads the complaint, 37 pages. Irreparable harm, criminal prosecution, federal charges, potential prison, a legal war against unlimited resources. All because 3 weeks ago, he posted a single string of numbers. Numbers that unlocked every PlayStation 3 on Earth. But here's what Sony doesn't know, what the FBI doesn't know, what nobody knows. This isn't his first time. Breaking the unbreakable. 4 years earlier, something more audacious, something that made Apple's engineers lose sleep, something that changed the smartphone industry forever. He was 17 years old. No degree, no team, no resources, and he hacked the iPhone. How does a teenager from New Jersey become the most wanted hacker in Silicon Valley? October 2nd, 1989, Glen Rock, New Jersey. George Francis Hotz Jr. is born. A sleepy commuter town, 20 miles from Manhattan. His father, elementary school teacher. His mother, sales. Middle class, comfortable, unremarkable. But except for one thing. By age 5, George is taking apart every electronic device in the house. Not breaking them, studying them. His parents find VCRs disassembled on the kitchen table, circuit boards, arranged in neat rows, like a surgeon preparing for operation. By age 7, writing his first lines of code. By 12, building robots for regional competitions. His designs aren't just functional, they're elegant. Other kids follow instruction manuals. George rewrites them. He never asked permission, his father, years later, to reporters. He just did things, then showed us what he'd built. Bergen County Academies, one of the top public magnet schools in America. George becomes known for 2 things: terrifying intelligence, complete disregard for authority. He doesn't believe in rules, not because he's rebellious, because he genuinely doesn't understand why they exist. Why can't you run code on hardware you own? Why can't you modify software you paid for? Why does a corporation tell you what to do with your property? These aren't philosophical questions. They're engineering problems. And engineering problems have solutions. The trigger. June 29th, 2007. Apple releases the iPhone. George watches the keynote, like everyone else. Steve Jobs, pulling the device from his pocket. Multi-touch screen, aluminum body. A computer in your pocket. But where most people see revolution, George sees something else. A cage. The iPhone is locked to AT&T exclusively. You want an iPhone? 2-year contract, $60 a month minimum. No exceptions. The software? Completely closed. Apple controls everything, every app, every feature, every line of code. Steve Jobs isn't selling a phone. He's selling a subscription to Apple's ecosystem. And once you're in, you never leave. George looks at the iPhone and thinks, this is wrong. Not wrong as in immoral, wrong as in incorrect, wrong as in someone made a mistake, wrong as in this can be fixed. He's 17 years old, never seen the inside of an iPhone, no formal training in telecommunications, no knowledge of baseband processors, no experience with cryptographic security, but he has 500 hours of summer vacation and absolutely nothing to lose. His parents think he's playing video games. His friends think he's doing college applications. Nobody knows that in a cramped bedroom in suburban New Jersey, a teenager is about to start a war with the most valuable company on Earth. To understand what George is attempting, you need to understand what the iPhone actually is. On the surface, a phone, touchscreen, camera, music player, simple. Underneath, a fortress. The iPhone runs on two separate processors. First, the application processor, the brain, runs iOS, displays apps, plays music. This is what most people think of. But there's a second processor, hidden, silent, far more important. The baseband processor. This chip handles all cellular communication, calls, texts, data. Everything that connects your phone to the network runs through this 29mm piece of silicon. And here's the crucial part. The baseband is locked, cryptographically. Apple worked with Infineon, German semiconductor company. They created a security system specifically designed to prevent exactly what George is about to attempt. The baseband checks for a carrier code, a T&T's code. Code doesn't match, phone doesn't connect, period. End of story. Every security researcher who's looked at it, same conclusion. It can't be done. Firmware encryption, signed bootloaders, hardware security modules. The iPhone's baseband might as well be a bank vault. George spends the first 3 weeks just understanding the problem. He buys 3 iPhones, $599 each, $1,797, his entire savings. First iPhone, cracked open within hours, photographs every component, maps every trace on the circuit board, identifies every chip. Second iPhone, test subject, solders wires directly to the baseband chip, connections thinner than human hair, builds a custom debugging interface, spare parts, RadioShack components. Third iPhone, sits untouched, control unit, proof that whatever he does actually works. The approach crystallizes, slowly. Step 1, get access to the baseband's bootloader, the code that runs when the chip first powers on. Read that code, understand how the security works. Step 2, find a vulnerability, a crack in the armor, a single mistake in thousands of lines of code. Step 3, write a software unlock, a program that tricks the baseband. Accept any carrier, not just AT&T. Simple in theory, effectively impossible in practice. George starts with hardware. The baseband communicates through a serial connection. He taps into it. Logic analyzer, a device that reads electrical signals between chips. 2 weeks, capturing data, thousands of packets, millions of bits. Custom software to decode the traffic, looking for patterns. Nothing. The communication is encrypted, not just encrypted, authenticated. Each packet carries a digital signature. Without the key, meaningless noise. He shifts tactics. The baseband has a JTAG interface, debugging port, used during manufacturing. Apple disabled it before shipping. But disabled doesn't mean removed. George spends 4 days, microscope, soldering iron, reactivating the JTAG port. The connections are microscopic. One wrong move fries the chip permanently. Day 5, he gets a signal. The baseband is talking to him, but the bootloader, the code he needs, still encrypted. The processor won't give up its secrets. George is 200 hours in, averaging 4 hours of sleep. His room smells like solder flux and energy drinks. His parents have stopped asking questions. Then, he finds it. A timing attack. When the baseband decrypts its bootloader, there's a fraction of a second, microseconds, where unencrypted code exists in memory, in RAM. Readable. If he can capture that moment, dump the memory at exactly the right instant, he'll have everything. He writes a custom tool, hardware interrupt, freezes the processor mid-boot. Timing has to be perfect. Too early, nothing's decrypted. Too late, already secured. He runs the exploit, 847 times. Attempt 848. The screen fills with hexadecimal code, the bootloader, unencrypted. George stares at his monitor, hands shaking. He's looking at code that maybe 50 people on Earth have ever seen. Code Apple and Infineon spent millions to protect. Now comes the real work. Reverse engineering takes another 100 hours. The code is complex. Security checks layered on security checks. But slowly, methodically, George maps every function, every variable, every decision point. And then, buried in 47,000 lines of assembly code, he finds it, a buffer overflow. When the baseband processes certain unlocked tokens, it copies data into a fixed-size memory buffer. If the data is larger than expected, it spills over, overwrites adjacent memory, corrupts the security check. For exactly 37 bytes, the baseband becomes writable. 37 bytes. That's all he has. 37 bytes to inject code that rewrites the carrier lock. Most exploits need hundreds of bytes, thousands. George has 37. He spends 3 weeks writing the tightest, most optimized code of his life. Assembly language. Every instruction counts. Every byte matters. The final payload, 4 bytes. Jump instruction, 8 bytes. Memory address modification, 12 bytes. Carrier code replacement, 9 bytes. Return sequence, 4 bytes. Checksum bypass. Total, 37 bytes. August 21st, 2007. George has been working 500 hours, across 62 days. He picks up the third iPhone, the untouched one. His proof of concept. He loads the exploit. If you're realizing that a 17-year-old with RadioShack parts just out-engineered a multi-billion-dollar corporation, you're not alone. Hit subscribe. Because what happens next, when Apple and the FBI get involved, makes the technical challenge look like the easy part. August 21st, 2007, 11:47 p.m., George's bedroom. The third iPhone sits on his desk, connected to his laptop, single white cable. He's done this 100 times. Test phones, bricked 3 of them, corrupted 2 beyond repair. But this time is different. This time, he's filming. Cheap webcam points at the iPhone screen. Another captures his monitor. If this works, he wants proof. Undeniable, irrefutable. He opens the terminal. /exploit-target equals baseband --payload equals unlock.bin. The screen goes black. 3 seconds. Nothing happens. 3 seconds that feel like 3 hours. Then text appears. Baseband version 03.14.08_G. Exploit stage 1. Buffer overflow. Success. Exploit stage 2. Payload injection. Success. Exploit stage 3. Carrier lock. Disabled. Exploit stage 4. Reboot. The iPhone restarts. Apple logo appears. Loading bar crawls across the screen. George's heart is beating so loud. He can hear it in his ears. Home screen loads. He picks up the phone, opens settings, taps carrier. Where it once said AT&T, locked, permanent, unchangeable. There's now a blank field, waiting for input. George walks to his closet, pulls out a shoebox. Inside, a T-Mobile SIM card. Bought 3 weeks ago, mall kiosk, $20. Pay as you go. He ejects the AT&T SIM, inserts T-Mobile, holds his breath. The iPhone searches for signal. 1 bar, 2 bars, 3 bars. T-Mobile appears, corner of the screen. George picks up his landline, dials his cell. The iPhone rings. He answers, and hears himself breathing through the speaker. It works. The iPhone. Apple's supposedly unbreakable, carrier locked, billion-dollar product, running on T-Mobile. George uploads the video, 1:23 a.m. Title, World's First iPhone Unlock. He goes to sleep. When he wakes up 8 hours later, his life has changed forever. The video, 47,000 views. By noon, 200,000. By evening, CNN is calling. His parents answer the phone. Is this the Hotz residence? We'd like to speak with George about the iPhone story. His mother, confused. What iPhone story? The news spreads like wildfire. Engadget. Teen hacker unlocks iPhone, makes history. Gizmodo. This kid just changed the wireless industry forever. The New York Times. iPhone unlocked. Cellular strategy thrown into question. Apple stock drops 2%. Single trading session. Analysts scramble. Every locked iPhone, now potentially unlocked. Every AT&T exclusive contract, now potentially worthless. The offers start pouring in. Terry Dadone, CEO of Certicell, major cell phone reseller, contacts George directly. His offer: one Nissan 350Z, brand new, plus 3 more iPhones. For what? For the single unlocked iPhone sitting on George's desk. George takes the deal. A 17-year-old trades a hacked phone for a $30,000 sports car, drives it to his senior year of high school. But the car isn't why this story matters. What matters is what happens next. George doesn't keep the exploit secret, doesn't sell it to the highest bidder, doesn't start a company, doesn't file patents. He posts the entire method online, for free. Every line of code, every hardware modification, every step of the process. Within weeks, software developers build on his work. User-friendly tools, point-and-click unlocking programs. Anyone can free their iPhone, not just hardware experts. Apple releases security patches. George releases new exploits. Apple locks down the bootloader. George finds another vulnerability. 2 years, cat and mouse. Every time Apple builds a wall, George finds a door. The jailbreaking community explodes. Millions unlock their phones. Third-party app stores emerge. Features Apple refuses to implement. Custom themes, background apps, wireless file transfer, all available through jailbreaking. 3 years later, Apple opens the App Store. Coincidence? Maybe. But developers who worked on jailbreak tweaks, they'll say later, the App Store exists because Apple realized they couldn't keep the gates closed. If they didn't open the platform voluntarily, hackers like George would do it for them. 2008, the Electronic Frontier Foundation gets involved. They petition the US Copyright Office, make jailbreaking legal. Their argument: you own the device, you should control the device. 2010, the Copyright Office agrees. Jailbreaking is officially legal in the United States. A 17-year-old from New Jersey didn't just hack a phone, he changed federal law. But George isn't satisfied. The iPhone was a challenge, a puzzle to solve. Now that it's solved, he's bored. He needs something bigger, something harder, something that everyone says is impossible. He finds it. Christmas Day, 2009. The PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 3 is different. Sony didn't just make it hard to hack. They made it embarrassing to try. 3 years. The PS3's security held. Every major hacking group in the world fails Zero Verflow. Team Twizzlers, the hackers who cracked the Wii and v.e.x, failed against Sony's console. The PS3 earned a reputation: unhackable. The security architecture is elegant. Custom cell processor, encrypted boot chain, hardware root of trust. Every piece of code that runs, verified, signed, authenticated. To George, it's the Mount Everest of hacking. He starts summer 2009. By January 2010, a breakthrough. Sony, in their infinite confidence, made a mistake. When they designed the PS3's signature verification system, they used a random number generator. Every legitimate Sony signature includes a random number. A nonce makes each signature unique. Here's the problem. The random number wasn't random. Sony's engineers used the same random number for every signature. Every single one. In cryptography, this is like using the same password for every account. Once someone figures it out, everything falls. George does the math. With enough signed code samples, he can reverse engineer Sony's private signing key. The key that says, this code is legitimate. The key Sony guards like nuclear launch codes. He gets the key. January 22nd, 2010. George publishes a video. He's running unsigned code on a PlayStation 3. Code Sony never authorized. Code that shouldn't exist. Then he does something That makes Sony's legal team physically ill. He publishes Sony's private key, the actual cryptographic key, the one that signs all PlayStation 3 software, the one that, if compromised, essentially gives anyone the ability to create official Sony code. The entire PlayStation 3 security model collapses instantly. Piracy becomes trivial. Homebrew software flourishes. The walls come down, and Sony responds. Not with a patch, not with a firmware update, with lawyers. January 11th, 2011, Sony files suit, U.S. District Court. Defendant, George Francis Hotz. The charges: Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violations, DMCA circumvention, breach of terms of service, tortious interference with business. Sony doesn't want money, they want blood. They demand George hand over his computers, his hard drives, his notes, and, most terrifyingly, the IP addresses and personal information of everyone who downloaded his work. Sony wants to know who the jailbreakers are, and they're willing to crush one 21-year-old to find out. George does what George always does. He fights. Starts a legal defense fund. Donations pour in, $10,000 in the first week. The hacking community rallies behind him. Anonymous declares war on Sony. PlayStation Network suffers the largest data breach in gaming history. 77 million accounts compromised. The connection between Anonymous and the PSN hack, never proven. But the timing is convenient. April 2011. The case settles. Terms are sealed. But the gist leaks. George agrees not to hack Sony products. Sony drops the suit. No damages. No prison time. No IP addresses handed over. George walks away free. But here's the twist. Nobody expected. In the middle of the Sony lawsuit, while George is still technically under legal assault, he gets a phone call. Caller ID says, Cupertino, California. Apple. The company he embarrassed. The company whose billion-dollar strategy he disrupted. The company that spent 3 years trying to patch his exploits. They want to offer him a job. George considers it. He's 21 years old, no college degree, dropped out of Johns Hopkins after 1 semester. Because he was bored. He's currently being sued by one of the largest corporations on Earth, and Apple wants to hire him. According to George, he turns them down. I'm not sure that working for a corporation is really something that's in my future. I like doing my own thing, the interviewer asks. What is your thing? George smiles. Breaking things. George Hotz never became a corporate employee. He became something else entirely. 2012, joins Facebook as a contractor, not an employee. Refuses to sign a non-compete agreement. Spends a year fixing bugs in their back-end infrastructure, then leaves. 2014, he does something unexpected. He starts hacking cars, specifically self-driving cars, in his garage, with parts from Amazon. While Tesla and Google spend billions on autonomous vehicle programs, George builds a working self-driving system for $1,000. He films himself driving hands-free on the highway. Video goes viral. Elon Musk calls him personally, offers a multi-million-dollar contract. George turns it down. Instead, he founds comma.ai, a startup dedicated to bringing self-driving technology to everyone. Their philosophy is pure George. Open source, transparent, anti-corporate. By 2024, comma.ai has 12,000 plus active users. Their system, OpenPilot, runs on more cars than any other consumer self-driving software. Estimated company valuation, $500 million. George's personal net worth, somewhere between $50 million and $200 million, depending on who's counting. Not bad for a college dropout who started by hacking a phone in his parents' basement. But here's what makes the story remarkable. Every major tech company, Apple, Google, Facebook, Tesla, has tried to hire George Hotz. Every major intelligence agency, NSA, FBI, CIA, has investigated him. Every major corporation whose products he's hacked has threatened legal action. And he's still free, still hacking, still posting his exploits online for anyone to use. The FBI opened a file on him in 2007. That file remains open, No charges have ever been filed. Why? Because George Hotz never crosses the line, never steals money, never sells exploits to criminals, never compromises user data. His hacks are always about one thing: proving that the walls are thinner than they appear. He's not a criminal. He's a whistleblower, a security researcher, an engineer who refuses to accept impossible as an answer. As of 2025, he's 35 years old, streams himself coding on Twitch, posts rants about AI on Twitter, drives a modified Lexus that drives itself. He never did take Apple's job. He never did need to. Here's what George Hotz understood at 17, that most people never learn. You don't ask permission to understand something you own. The iPhone hack wasn't about piracy, wasn't about saving money on phone plans. It was about a fundamental question. Who controls the technology you purchase? Apple's answer was clear. We do. You rent access to our ecosystem. You play by our rules. George's answer was different. I paid for this. It's mine, and I'll learn how it works, whether you like it or not. This philosophy has a name: the right to repair, the right to tinker, the right to own what you own. It's the reason you can jailbreak your phone today without going to prison. The reason farmers can repair their own tractors. The reason the EU is forcing Apple to use standard charging ports. One teenager with a soldering iron didn't just unlock a phone, he unlocked a conversation about who really owns the future. In a world where corporations want to control every line of code, every security update, every feature you can access, George Hotz remains proof that the walls are never as strong as they seem, that the giants can be challenged, that curiosity is the only key you need. As George once said, the greatest trick Apple ever pulled was convincing people they couldn't understand technology. He proved them wrong, and he's still proving them wrong every single day. If you want to see how another hacker took on the US government and exposed secrets that changed history, watch the video on Edward Snowden, because his story proves sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon. It's a USB drive, and someone willing to use it